Deep in the rugged wilderness where few dare to venture, Alpha Apache sought only solitude and a fresh start. The abandoned cabin seemed perfect, weathered by time yet sturdy in its bones. As dust particles danced in shafts of sunlight, his loyal companion, an aging blue heeler, began frantically pawing at the floorboards in the corner bedroom. The dog's desperate whining grew until Apache pried up the rotted planks. What lay beneath wasn't treasure, it was something far more valuable and heartbreaking. What forgotten story had been buried here for decades? What connection would forever bind this weary soul to the cabin's previous owner? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The tarnished compass rested heavily in Alpha's weathered palm. Its needle trembled slightly, much like his own resolve these days. 27 years in special forces had taught him to always find his way, to never lose his bearings. Yet here he was, adrift in his own life. Morning light filtered through the pickup's dusty windshield as Alpha squinted at the distant silhouette of mountains. 3 days of driving had put necessary distance between him and Fort Carson. The discharge papers tucked in the glove box were merely a formality. In truth, he'd left the service years ago, at least in spirit, after Kandahar. What do you think, Blue? Alpha glanced at the aging heeler riding shotgun, silver muzzle and cloudy eyes, a mirror to his own weathered visage. Too late for men like us to start over? Blue offered a soft whine, pressing his nose to the window. The dashboard clock read 6:17 a.m. Sarah would have been up by now, brewing coffee, humming those old country tunes she loved. The thought punctured him anew. 6 months since the cancer took her, and the wound remained raw. I know, boy. I miss her too. The compass had been Sarah's parting gift. So you can find your way when I'm gone, she'd whispered, pressing it into his hand during those final hospital days. What she couldn't have known was how thoroughly he would lose his direction without her steady presence. Alpha adjusted the rearview mirror, catching sight of his reflection. Deep lines framed eyes that had seen too much. Mogadishu in '93, Fallujah, then Afghanistan. The last mission replayed in his mind like a broken film reel. The intel failure, the ambush, carrying Rivera's body through mountains for 2 days. He traced the scar running from his left ear to collarbone, a permanent reminder of his miscalculation. The physical pain had eventually subsided. The other wounds never would. Command said there was nothing I could have done differently, Alpha muttered to Blue, who listened with the patience of a long-time confidant. Load of horse manure, that. I was the one who chose that route. The retirement ceremony had been predictably uncomfortable. Medals pinned to his chest by commanders who'd never seen real combat. Hollow speeches about valor and sacrifice. He'd stood at rigid attention, the model soldier until the end. While inside, he'd already abandoned all of it. The compass needle swung lazily as the road curved northward. Alpha had chosen the cabin site unseen, based solely on 3 non-negotiable criteria: isolation, water access, and defensible terrain. Old habits. His savings wouldn't last forever, but the military pension would cover basics. Sarah's medical bills had devoured most of their nest egg, but he didn't resent that. He'd have given everything to buy her more time. You ever wonder if we're running away or running towards something? He asked Blue, who yawned dramatically in response. Fair point. Probably both. The turnoff appeared, a barely visible dirt road vanishing into pine forest. According to the realtor, the only human he'd spoken more than 10 words to in weeks, the cabin was another 7 miles in. Perfect. Alpha downshifted, the truck protesting as it navigated the rutted path. Blue perked up, nose twitching at new scents filtering through cracked windows. As trees thickened around them, Alpha felt his breathing slow for the first time in months. Out here, the constant hypervigilance that had kept him alive through 4 combat tours might finally ease. No crowds to scan, no suspicious packages, no need to always sit facing the door in restaurants. The compass warmed in his hand as they pushed deeper into wilderness. Sarah would have appreciated the symmetry, how he'd begun life in remote backcountry before the army transformed him, and now returned full circle. "Approaching our objective," he murmured in the clipped tone of countless missions. Then catching himself, he sighed. "Guess I need some new vocabulary, eh, boy?" Blue's tail thumped against the seat. The realtor had been suspiciously eager to unload the property. "Been vacant nearly 40 years, she'd said. "Previous owner just disappeared. Bank foreclosure, very motivated seller. Alpha hadn't asked questions. The price was right and anonymity suited him fine. Whatever ghosts might dwell there couldn't be worse than those he already carried. As the first glimpse of weathered roofline appeared through the trees, Alpha set the compass on the dashboard. For better or worse, he'd found his destination. What remained to be seen was whether he'd found his direction. "Home, sweet home, Blue," he said softly. "Let's see what we've gotten ourselves into." The rusted key felt impossibly small against Alpha's calloused palm. Property of this magnitude, 26 acres according to the deed, reduced to this single corroded piece of metal. He turned it over, examining the intricate bow design, some kind of flowering vine pattern, nearly worn smooth by years of handling. Alpha killed the truck engine. The abrupt silence was profound, broken only by Blue's excited panting and distant birdsong. After 3 days on highways with their relentless noise, the stillness pressed against his eardrums like a physical sensation. "Easy, old-timer," he muttered as Blue pawed at the passenger door. "We'll stretch our legs soon enough." The cabin stood before them, a weathered sentinel amid encroaching pines. 2 stories of hand-hewn logs, darkened by decades of mountain weather. The tin roof had developed a patina of rust that blended with the surrounding autumn foliage. Not exactly welcoming, but solid. Defensible, his military mind noted automatically. Alpha grabbed his rucksack and released Blue, who bounded toward the structure with surprising agility for his 12 years. The journey had been harder on both of them than Alpha cared to admit. His bad knee throbbed from hours of driving, and the phantom pain along his left side, souvenir of Kandahar, had flared up crossing the Rockies. As he approached the cabin, Alpha took stock with practiced efficiency. The stone chimney appeared intact despite visible mortar deterioration. Windows were surprisingly unbroken, though filmed with decades of grime. The broad covered porch sagged slightly at one corner, but would serve well enough as an observation post. He caught himself as a place to enjoy morning coffee. Blue had already completed his perimeter. Checker now stood expectantly at the front door, tail wagging uncertainly. "What's your assessment, Sergeant?" Alpha asked, falling into the familiar pattern of addressing his former service dog with military formality. The habit should have faded after Blue's retirement 5 years ago, but somehow it persisted, a comfort to them both. The key stuck initially in the lock, requiring gentle coaxing. When it finally turned, the door protested with a groan that echoed Alpha's own as he hefted his pack higher on his shoulder. Musty air enveloped them as they stepped across the threshold. Alpha blinked, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimness. The interior revealed itself gradually. Open concept main floor, with stone fireplace dominating one wall, simple kitchen area, rough-hewn staircase leading to what he assumed was a sleeping loft. Nothing grand, but more spacious than it had appeared from outside. Not bad, Blue, not bad at all. The dog's nails clicked against the wooden floorboards as he explored, nose working overtime. Alpha set down his pack and followed, noting the craftsmanship evident despite years of neglect. Someone had built this place with care. Dovetailed corners, hand-carved banisters, thoughtful window placement to capture both light and views. Dust motes danced in shafts of late afternoon sunlight. The cabin had been abandoned but not vandalized, a small miracle given its isolation. Aside from a thick layer of dust and some animal evidence in corners, it remained largely as its previous owner had left it. Alpha moved methodically through the space, assessing. The furniture was minimal and draped with yellowed sheets, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a worn leather armchair positioned for fireside sitting, simple shelving built into the walls, practical, utilitarian. It suited him. He paused at the stone hearth, running fingers along the mantel. A few items remained: a chipped ceramic mug, an antique compass, non-functional, a small carved wooden box. Not valuable enough to steal, he supposed, or perhaps too personal for looters to bother with. The key grew warm in his pocket as he climbed the stairs to inspect the loft. A simple bedroom occupied half the space. Iron frame bed stripped to the mattress, dresser, side table. The other half stood empty, save for a rocking chair positioned beneath the gable window, overlooking the valley below. Blue whined from downstairs, drawing Alpha's attention. "Find something, boy?" Following the sound, he discovered Blue in what appeared to be a small bedroom off the main living area. The dog stood rigid, staring intently at a specific section of floorboard in the corner. "What is it?" Alpha knelt beside him, examining the spot. Nothing immediately visible, but he'd learned to trust the healer's instincts. He rose stiffly, making mental notes of immediate priorities. Clear chimney, test water pump, secure perimeter. The basics first, then comforts. Outside, shadows lengthened as sunset approached. Alpha stood on the porch, key still clutched in his hand. For the first time since Sarah's passing, he felt something like potential unfurling within him. Not hope, he wasn't ready for that, but perhaps its distant cousin. "What do you think?" "Blue, will it do?" The dog pressed against his leg in response, a familiar pressure. It was answer enough. The ancient iron stove dominated the kitchen corner, its black surface reflecting the beam of Alpha's flashlight. As darkness settled outside, he'd opted against lighting the kerosene lamps until he could properly inspect the chimney tomorrow. Military instinct, no sense advertising his presence on the first night with visible light from windows. "What do you think, Blue?" "Probably hasn't been fired up since Reagan was president." The dog lay curled on his bedroll, watchful eyes tracking Alpha's movements. They'd both eaten a cold dinner from supplies brought in the truck. Tomorrow would be time enough for a proper meal, assuming the stove could be coaxed back to life. Alpha ran his hand over the cast-iron surface, appreciating the craftsmanship. They didn't make things like this anymore, built to last generations, not just until the warranty expired. The maker's mark, Montana Forge 1932, remained crisp despite nearly a century of use. Someone had cared for this stove, kept it oiled and clean before the cabin's abandonment. A distant owl called, its question echoing unanswered through the valley. Alpha moved to the front window, peering through a gap in the grime. Moonlight silvered the clearing, casting long shadows from the surrounding pines. Beautiful country, harsh and unforgiving. The kind that demanded respect rather than affection. He unrolled his sleeping bag near the fireplace, not yet willing to claim the upstairs bedroom. Years of deployment had taught him to sleep lightly in new environments, to establish security before comfort. "You still on watch rotation, Sergeant?" Alpha asked as Blue lifted his head. The old healer sighed heavily, circling 3 times before settling again. Age had slowed him, but the intelligence in those eyes remained sharp. Alpha sometimes wondered, which of them had more miles on the odometer, measured not in years, but in hard roads traveled. Sleep came reluctantly. The cabin's unfamiliar sounds, creaking timbers, skittering in the eaves, wind's whisper through imperfect seams, kept Alpha's senses firing just below alert threshold. His hand rested on the Colt 1911 beside his makeshift bed, another habit he couldn't seem to break. Midnight passed according to his internal clock, calibrated through years of guard duty. The dreams, when they came, were the familiar ones. Kandahar's dust clogging his throat, Rivera's blood slick on his hands, the helicopter forever delayed. He jerked awake at 0200, sweat-soaked despite the cabin's chill. Blue stood at alert, hackles raised, staring toward the bedroom where he'd earlier shown interest in the floorboards. "You hear something, boy?" Alpha reached for the flashlight, switching it on with practiced silence. The beam caught Blue's reflective eyes, then swept toward the bedroom doorway. Nothing visible, yet the dog's tension was unmistakable. Years in special ops had taught Alpha to trust animal senses over human. He rose, pistol in hand, and moved soundlessly toward the bedroom. Blue remained rooted, a low growl vibrating in his chest. The bedroom revealed nothing obvious, empty save for the iron bedframe and simple dresser he'd noted earlier. Alpha's beam swept methodically from ceiling to floor, pausing at the section of boards that had captured Blue's attention. "What is it, boy?" Mice wouldn't be surprising, but mice wouldn't explain the dog's current posture, the territorial defense stance Alpha recognized from missions where genuine threats loomed. A sound from above, subtle shifting of weight on old timber, froze them both. Someone walking in the loft. Alpha's combat instincts surged. He gestured Blue to stay, then moved toward the stairs with the silent precision of his training. The loft stood empty, moonlight spilling through uncurtained windows across bare floorboards. Nothing disturbed, nothing changed from his earlier inspection, yet the sensation of presence lingered, like the residual warmth after someone has left a room. Blue whined from below, drawing Alpha back downstairs. The dog had moved to the front window, ears forward, tail straight, his alert posture. Outside, the clearing remained still. Not even wind disturbed the pines. Yet Alpha felt it too now, the weight of observation, the certainty of being watched. "Who's there?" he called, voice cutting through silence. No response came save the distant owl's repeated question. Dawn found Alpha seated on the porch steps, coffee steaming in a tin cup, pistol within reach. He hadn't returned to sleep after the night's disturbances, choosing instead to stand watch as the eastern sky gradually lightened. Blue dozed beside, him apparently unconcerned now that daylight approached. Alpha rubbed his face, feeling stubble beneath calloused fingers. Perhaps it had been imagination, the natural unease of a new place. Or perhaps not. Either way, he'd faced worse than bumps in the night. The stove would be his first project today. Something solid, practical. The rest would sort itself out in time. "Just us and the ghosts, eh, Blue?" he murmured, sipping the bitter coffee. "Reckon we'll all learn to live together." The leather-bound notebook lay open on the rough-hewn table, Alpha's blocky handwriting filling the first page with a methodical list. 26 years in Special Forces had instilled in him an appreciation for detailed planning, each mission beginning with objectives, resources, and timelines. This renovation would be no different. Day 1. Priorities. Chimney inspection, cleaning stove. Repair water source assessment. Secure perimeter supply inventory. Morning sun streamed through windows he'd wiped clean at dawn, revealing dust motes dancing in golden shafts. Alpha took a final sip of coffee, then closed the notebook with purpose. "Let's get to work, Blue." The healer rose from his spot by the door, stretching arthritic limbs before following Alpha outside. The day promised fair weather, perfect for beginning the cabin's resurrection from decades of neglect. Alpha had always been good with his hands. Before the military claimed him, he'd apprenticed with his grandfather, a master carpenter whose patient teachings remained with him still. Those skills had served him well during deployments, earning him the additional duty of squad repair specialist. If it could be fixed with available materials and basic tools, Alpha could make it happen. He started with the chimney, fashioning a makeshift brush from pine branches and working methodically from the roof down. Decades of nests, debris, and creosote came loose under his efforts. By midday, he'd pronounced it sound enough for careful use. The water situation proved more promising than expected. The previous owner had installed a gravity-fed system from a spring higher on the mountainside. The collection tank showed minimal contamination, and though the pipes needed attention in places, the fundamental engineering was solid. "Somebody knew what they were doing," Alpha murmured as he traced the waterline into the cabin. "Built this place to last." Blue had maintained his peculiar interest in the bedroom floorboards, returning repeatedly to sniff and paw at the corner. Alpha had inspected the area carefully in daylight, finding nothing obvious beyond some warping in the old wood. Whatever drew the dog's attention remained a mystery for now. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Alpha turned his attention to the stove. The firebox contained only ancient ash, undisturbed for years. The flue mechanism moved stiffly, but yielded to penetrating oil and persistence. By sunset, he'd coaxed a small fire to life inside it, filling the cabin with both warmth and the rich scent of wood smoke. "That's more like it," he told Blue, who had settled on the bedroll, nose resting on paws. "Beats MREs and cold coffee, doesn't it?" Throughout the day, Alpha had maintained awareness of his surroundings, another military habit he couldn't shake. The feeling of being observed had returned intermittently, raising the hairs on his neck despite bright daylight and clear sightlines in all directions. Nothing concrete, nothing he could report in a briefing, just the persistent sense of not being entirely alone. The notebook lay nearby as he prepared a simple meal on the now functioning stove. Alpha had added observations throughout the day, details about the cabin's construction that might prove useful. The previous owner had been resourceful, creative in solving the challenges of remote living. He found himself developing a grudging respect for whoever had built this place. After dinner, Alpha made a final inspection of the property before darkness fell completely. The outbuilding he'd initially taken for a woodshed revealed itself as a small workshop. Tools hung on the walls, handsaws, augers, planes and chisels preserved from the elements by the tight construction of the shed itself. Many showed signs of extensive use, handles worn smooth by years of craftsmanship. Regular little arsenal. "In here," Alpha observed, testing the edge of a chisel against his thumb. "Still sharp after all these years." Blue remained by the workshop doorway, unwilling to enter despite Alpha's encouragement. Another oddity to file away. Back in the cabin, Alpha added to his notebook by lamplight: workshop tools, serviceable, roof inspection tomorrow, investigate bedroom floor. Check spring source upstream. He paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added one more line: previous owner, skilled builder, planned for long-term occupation. Closing the notebook, Alpha leaned back in the chair he'd wiped clean that morning. The cabin felt different now, still unfamiliar, but developing the first threads of connection. The stove's warmth permeated the main room, pushing back the mountain chill that descended swiftly after sunset. Blue had resumed his vigil near the bedroom doorway, his attention divided between Alpha and whatever continued to draw him to those floorboards. "We'll figure it out, Sergeant," Alpha promised. "All in due time." The notebook remained on the table, a beginning record of this new mission, one without deployment orders or extraction plans. A mission of reclamation, both of the cabin and perhaps himself. The pocket knife lay open in Alpha's palm, its bone handle worn smooth from decades of use. It had been his father's before him, a constant companion through 4 continents and countless missions. 3.5 inches of high-carbon steel that had saved his life more times than he cared to remember. Cutting through restraints in Somalia, removing shrapnel in Afghanistan, fashioning emergency repairs to equipment that meant the difference between extraction and abandonment. Now it served a more mundane purpose, probing the suspicious floorboards that had captured Blue's unwavering attention for 3 days. "Straight. You're not letting this go, are you?" Alpha murmured as the healer paced anxiously beside him, nose twitching at the seam between 2 wide planks. Morning light streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes disturbed by their movement. 3 days of steady work had transformed the cabin's main living areas from neglected to habitable, but this room had resisted Alpha's efforts at normalization. Something about the space felt different, cooler than it should be, despite the autumn sunshine, with occasional whiffs of a scent he couldn't quite identify. Something floral, perhaps, like lavender, there and gone before he could place it. The knife blade slipped easily between the boards, meeting less resistance than it should have. Alpha frowned, applying gentle pressure. The plank shifted slightly, confirming his growing suspicion that these boards weren't fixed to the joists below like the others. "Think we're onto something, boy?" Blue's tail wagged once, his entire body tense with anticipation. Alpha worked methodically, tracing the outline of what appeared to be a section of flooring approximately 3 feet square. The knife blade revealed a clear separation from surrounding boards, too precise to be accidental warping or settlement. "Deliberate," he concluded, sitting back on his heels. "Someone built this to be removed." The question, of course, was why. The knife blade located a slightly wider gap at one corner. When Alpha applied pressure there, the section lifted a fraction of an inch. No hinges, designed to be fully removable rather than to swing open. Clever construction that would be undetectable to casual inspection. Blue's whining intensified, the dog practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Stand down, Sergeant!" Alpha ordered, using the firm tone that still commanded the healer's respect. "Let's do this by the book." Years in special forces had taught Alpha caution. Hidden compartments rarely contained pleasant surprises. In Afghanistan, similar discoveries had often preceded explosive devices or weapons caches. While he doubted this remote cabin harbored anything so immediately lethal, military instincts died hard. He worked the blade around the perimeter one final time, then set the knife aside. Using his fingertips at the wider gap, Alpha carefully lifted the section of flooring. It came free with surprising ease, revealing darkness below. Blue's reaction was immediate, backing away with a startled yelp, then returning to peer cautiously over Alpha's shoulder. Whatever the dog had sensed through the floorboards, the reality seemed to both confirm and confound his expectations. Alpha reached for the flashlight beside him, directing its beam into the cavity. The space beneath was roughly 2 feet deep, extending beyond the removed section to create a hidden storage area between floor and foundation. Not large enough for a person to hide in, but substantial enough to conceal significant belongings. The beam caught something reflective amid the shadows. Alpha leaned closer, careful not to disturb any contents until he'd assessed what he was seeing. A small wooden box, its cedar surface aged to a rich patina, sat centered in the space. Brass fittings gleamed dully in the flashlight beam. Beside it lay what appeared to be a bundle of fabric, something wrapped carefully and tied with faded ribbon. Nothing immediately threatening, but Alpha maintained his caution. "Stay," he instructed Blue, who remained in a perfect sit-stay despite his obvious curiosity. Using the knife blade, Alpha gently nudged the box, checking for tripwires or pressure triggers, another habit from missions where booby traps were common. Finding none, he carefully lifted it from its hiding place. The box wasn't locked, though the brass latch had developed verdigris in the dampness beneath the floor. It opened with minimal resistance, revealing contents that Alpha couldn't immediately reconcile with his expectations. Photographs, letters, small personal items, carefully preserved. Blue finally broke his stay, moving forward to sniff delicately at the box. His previous agitation had transformed to something like reverence, as though he somehow recognized the significance of their discovery. Alpha lifted one of the photographs, holding it in the sunlight streaming through the window. A young woman with dark hair and solemn eyes gazed back at him from another time. The cabin stood visible in the background, though newer, its logs still golden rather than the silver grey of present day. The pocket knife lay forgotten beside him as Alpha carefully examined the photograph. A strange sense of recognition stirring, despite the impossibility of knowing this woman from another era. "Who were you?" he asked the silent image. "And why did you hide your memories beneath the floor?" Blue settled beside him with a heavy sigh, as though a long vigil had finally ended. The silver locket dangled from Alpha's fingers, catching the afternoon light that slanted through the bedroom window. Small and oval-shaped, its surface etched with intricate vines and flowers, the craftsmanship of another era. He'd found it nestled among the photographs and letters in the cedar box, this most personal of items, hidden away beneath floorboards for decades. "What do you make of this, Blue?" he asked, turning the locket to examine both sides. The aging healer lay nearby, chin resting on paws, watching with steady eyes as Alpha carefully arranged the contents of the box on the cabin floor. The dog's earlier frenzy had given way to a watchful calm. As though his mission had been accomplished, Alpha had spent the afternoon methodically examining each item from the hidden cache, his military training evident in the precise way he laid everything out in categories. Photographs in one grouping, letters in another, personal items arranged by size. The systematic approach was second nature after years of intelligence analysis. Context mattered. Relationships between items often revealed more than the items themselves. The photographs told a partial story. The dark-haired woman appeared in many, sometimes alone, sometimes with a large dog that reminded Alpha unsettlingly of Blue. She aged subtly across the images, her expression growing more confident but somehow more guarded as time passed. The cabin featured prominently in the background of many shots, showing seasonal changes and gradual improvements to the property. No other people appeared in any of the photographs. Not a single one. The letters provided more concrete details, though Alpha felt a twinge of discomfort reading them. These weren't meant for his eyes, yet their owner had been gone for decades, according to the realtor. If not him, who would ever know her story? Most were unsent, addressed simply to Sarah, apparently the woman's sister. They chronicled her life at the cabin in careful, educated handwriting. November 1978, found this place by accident. Previous owner was an old trapper who died with no family. Bank practically gave it away. It needs work, but it's perfect. No one will think to look here. January 1979, first winter harder than expected. Learned to split wood properly after nearly taking off a finger. The isolation gets to me sometimes, but it's safer this way. For both of us, Alpha paused, rereading that line. Both? He scanned other letters for clarification. April 1979, spring finally arriving. Started a small garden. It's good to have fresh things after months of canned food. He's still watching the roads. I saw his car in town last month, keeping my head down. He, a husband. Boyfriend? The letters never specified, referring only to someone the woman clearly feared. Alpha turned the locket over in his hands, finding a small catch on one side. It opened with gentle pressure, revealing two tiny photographs within, faded but still discernible. The woman from the other photographs on one side, on the other a child, a boy of perhaps 4 or 5 with the same solemn eyes. She had a son, Alpha murmured. But where is he in the other photographs? Blue's ears perked up at the change in Alpha's tone, head tilting slightly. The dog's reaction reminded Alpha of something, a detail from the inspection of the cabin when they'd first arrived. The strange room off the kitchen, smaller than a proper bedroom, with a window set unusually high in the wall. He'd assumed it was a pantry or storage area, but now, setting the locket carefully aside, Alpha returned to the letters. Scanning for mentions of the child, August 1979, M is growing so fast. Set up the small room for him with shelves for his toys. He asks about going outside more, but I've explained why we need to be careful. December 1979. Hard to make Christmas special with so little, but M seemed happy with the wooden animals I carved. His favorite is the wolf. He carries it everywhere. Alpha sat back, piecing together the narrative emerging from these fragments. A woman and child hiding from someone, living in isolation for protection. The careful arrangement of the cabin, high windows in the small room that couldn't be seen into from outside, the hidden compartment beneath the floor for important items. The locket caught the light again as he lifted it, studying the child's face more carefully. There was joy there despite the circumstances, a testament to the woman's efforts to create normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. Alpha felt a deepening connection to this unknown woman, a fellow survivor, doing whatever necessary to protect what mattered most. Her methods different from his military training, but the core imperative the same: adapt, overcome, protect. Blue rose suddenly, moving to the bedroom doorway with ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Alpha was on his feet instantly, hand moving automatically to his side, where a sidearm would have been during deployment. The habit persisted despite the pistol being secured in his truck. "What is it, boy?" The dog's focus remained fixed on something Alpha couldn't perceive, something beyond the physical space around them. The locket in Alpha's hand seemed to grow momentarily cold, then returned to normal temperature so quickly he questioned whether he'd imagined it. "Hello," he called, feeling slightly foolish addressing an empty cabin, yet unable to ignore Blue's reaction. Only silence answered, but the air felt charged somehow, as though the revelation of these hidden stories had awakened something long dormant within these walls. The rosary beads slipped through Alpha's fingers as he sat at the kitchen table, their smooth wooden surfaces worn from years of desperate prayers. He wasn't a religious man, the battlefields had cured him of that, but he recognized the significance these beads must have held for Elena. That was her name. He'd discovered, written inside the journal's cover, Elena Marquez, alongside an address in Denver crossed out, with a single decisive line. "Elena," he said aloud, testing the name in the cabin's silence. "Elena and Michael." Blue lifted his head at the sound, then settled back into his spot near the door. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, the first autumn storm rolling through the mountains. The weather had driven them indoors after 3 days of steady progress on exterior repairs. Alpha had hesitated before opening the journal. That final barrier of privacy, more substantial than the hidden compartment that had concealed it. The letters had been revealing but selective, clearly composed with the awareness that they might someday be read by others. A journal was different, rawer, more intimate, but the woman had been gone for decades, and something about her story had grabbed hold of Alpha in a way he couldn't explain. Not just curiosity, but a sense of responsibility, as if finding these artifacts obligated him to bear witness. The rosary had been tucked between the journal's pages, marking an entry from January 1979. The dark wooden beads and simple cross spoke of utility rather than ornament, though the silver medallion connecting the strands showed signs of frequent handling, its surface worn smooth at the edges. The journal entry beside it read, "January 18th, 1979, 3 months in this place. And sometimes I still wake expecting to hear traffic or neighbors." The silence remains the hardest adjustment. That and the cold. I've never known cold like this. It has personality, presence. It hunts for ways inside, finds every gap in the logs, every tear in my coat. Michael doesn't complain, thank God. He's adapted better than I have, making adventures from our limitations. Yesterday he built a fort from blankets and chairbacks, declaring it super-secret headquarters. If only he understood how true that is, how much our survival depends on secrecy. Found Mama's rosary in my coat pocket today. Don't remember packing it in our hasty departure. The familiar weight of the beads brings some comfort, though I wonder what God makes of prayers from hiding places. Does he understand why I took Michael and ran? Does he forgive the lies, the broken promises, the abandoned life? Robert's face haunts my dreams. Not the monster who emerged after we married, but the charming law student who once brought me wildflowers and spoke of justice. How does someone change so completely? Or was the monster always there, lurking beneath carefully constructed charm? The last time, when he broke my arm for receiving a phone call from a male colleague, I saw the truth in his eyes. He would eventually kill me. Maybe Michael too, if I wasn't there to shield him. The system wouldn't protect us. Not from a rising prosecutor with political connections and a spotless public image. So we vanished. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. Just the emergency cash I'd hidden for months, and Mama's old station wagon. 6 states between us before I found this place. Is it selfish to sometimes miss hot showers and libraries? To crave conversation with another adult? Michael deserves more than this isolation, but he deserves life more. Alpha set down the rosary, something tightening in his chest. The parallels weren't lost on him. 2 souls retreating from the world for different reasons, seeking the same sanctuary decades apart. His fingers traced the indentations her pen had left on the paper, the pressure revealing emotions contained by careful handwriting. He turned the page. February 1st, 1979. A dog appeared at the edge of the clearing today. Some kind of shepherd mix, ribs showing, clearly abandoned or lost. Michael spotted him first and was halfway across the yard before I could stop him. I was terrified, not knowing if the animal was dangerous, but the dog just stood there, watching with these eerily intelligent eyes. Michael named him Wolf, despite my explanations about dogs versus wolves. The animal followed us to the porch but wouldn't come inside. I left scraps, expecting him to disappear by morning. He was still there at dawn. And again tonight, just watching, keeping a careful distance but refusing to leave. Michael is ecstatic, begging to keep him. I remain cautious, but find myself grateful for another set of eyes, another layer of security. If someone approaches, I'm certain Wolf would alert us. Alpha glanced at Blue, who had moved to sit beside him, pressing warm fur against his leg as if sensing his thoughts. History repeats itself, eh, boy? The rosary beads caught the lamplight, their simple wooden surfaces reflecting nothing. Yet Alpha felt their weight far beyond their physical presence, a tangible connection to a woman who had walked this same path of isolation and survival. Her fingers once seeking the same comfort from these beads that he now sought from her words. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof in a rhythm like distant marching. Alpha turned another page, sensing that Elena's journey had only begun to reveal itself. The whittled wolf rested in Alpha's palm, its wooden form smooth from countless hours of handling. 4 inches long and carved from pine, the figure captured a remarkable likeness, despite its simple execution. Alert ears, watchful eyes, a protective stance that conveyed both vigilance and loyalty. Beneath its base, 2 initials had been carefully etched, EM. 3 days had passed since Alpha discovered Elena's journal. 3 days of dividing his time between necessary cabin repairs and careful reading of her story, rationing the entries like a soldier, preserving supplies. He found himself deliberately slowing his progress through her words, as though rushing would somehow disrespect the journey she had documented. "What do you think, Blue?" Quite the craftsman, wasn't she? The healer sniffed the carving with interest, then looked toward the window, where late afternoon light filtered through trees, showing the first hints of autumn color. Outside, the forest had grown silent, that peculiar hush that often preceded dusk. When day creatures settled and night dwellers had yet to emerge, Alpha set the wooden wolf on the table beside a neat stack of similar carvings he'd found in the small room off the kitchen, the child's room. He now understood. Miniature bears, deer, rabbits, birds, an entire menagerie Elena had created for her son during long winter evenings. Each piece showed increasing skill, her craftsmanship evolving from crude early attempts to the remarkably detailed wolf that had clearly been Michael's favorite. The discovery of these carvings had coincided with Alpha's own renovation plans for the cabin. He'd begun making lists, sketching improvements, calculating materials needed, only to realize his ideas mirrored work Eleanor had already documented in her journal. The garden plot he'd staked out stood precisely where her entries described, planting vegetables. The reinforced shutters he'd designed matched improvements she'd made during her second winter. Following in her footsteps, without even knowing it, he murmured, turning the wolf carving to catch the light. Last night, the dreams had started, so vivid they left him disoriented upon waking. Dreams of sitting at this same table, hands smaller and feminine, carefully working a knife across wood as a small boy slept in the next room. Dreams of standing at the kitchen window, watching the tree line with both hope and dread. A different dog at her side. Alpha had spent 26 years in combat zones, developing instincts that kept him alive. Those same instincts now told him something unusual was happening in this cabin, something beyond rational explanation. He found himself speaking aloud to Elena as he worked, explaining his repair choices, asking what she would think of his modifications. Going soft in my old age, he told Blue, who watched him with knowing eyes that sometimes seemed too intelligent. Too aware, Blue's behavior had shifted since the discovery of Elena's belongings. His earlier agitation had transformed into a strange sort of purposefulness, leading Alpha to specific areas of the cabin that invariably yielded some new insight. A cache of preserved seeds in the root cellar, markings on a support beam tracking Michael's growth, a hidden drawer in the kitchen containing more journal volumes. Now the healer rose suddenly. Trotting to the small bedroom and standing expectantly at the doorway, Alpha followed, wooden wolf still in hand. Blue circled the room once, then stopped at the back wall, pawing gently at the floorboard nearest the corner. Again, Alpha knelt beside him. "What now, boy?" Using his pocket knife, Alpha carefully pried up the indicated board. Unlike the previous hiding spot, this one contained only a single item, a child's drawing preserved between two pieces of cardboard bound with twine. Alpha lifted it carefully, untying the protective covering with a soldier's precision. The crayon illustration showed 3 figures standing beside a simple house. A woman with long dark hair, a small boy, and a large animal that was clearly meant to be a dog. Above them, written in a child's unsteady hand, "My family." Alpha stared at the drawing, something cold sliding down his spine. The dog in the illustration, drawn with a distinctive blue-gray coat and one ear that didn't stand fully upright, bore an unsettling resemblance to Blue. "Not possible," Alpha whispered. Glancing at his companion, Blue returned his gaze with that same unnervingly intelligent look, then moved to sit directly on the spot where the drawing had been hidden, as though claiming a long-remembered position. The wooden wolf in Alpha's hand seemed suddenly heavier, its carved eyes somehow more alert. Outside, shadows lengthened across the clearing as the sun dipped behind distant peaks. Alpha had witnessed things during his deployments that defied easy explanation. Phenomena attributed to stress, sleep deprivation, or cultural differences. He'd maintained professional skepticism while respecting his teammates' varied beliefs. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the growing certainty that the connections between Elena's life and his own extended beyond mere coincidence. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked, addressing both the dog and the empty cabin that increasingly felt anything but vacant. Silence answered, yet within it lay a palpable sense of expectation, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for him to understand something just beyond his grasp. The weather-beaten fishing rod leaned against the cabin wall, its bamboo length darkened with age and handling. Alpha had discovered it behind a loose board in the workshop, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and preserved despite decades of disuse. The craftsmanship was evident. Handmade guides wrapped with fine thread, a cork handle worn smooth by countless hours of use, a hand-carved wooden reel that still turned with surprising smoothness when tested. It had been Elena's father's, according to a journal entry from summer 1980, a prized possession she'd grabbed during their hasty flight from Denver, one of the few connections to her life before. "We might as well put it to use," Alpha told Blue as he examined the ancient line, brittle but intact. "There's that stream on the eastern property line. 2 weeks had passed since the discovery of Michael's drawing. 14 days of increasingly unsettling experiences, objects not quite where he'd left them, the distinct impression of movement glimpsed from the corner of his eye, vivid dreams that left him with knowledge he couldn't possibly possess. Last night, he'd awakened knowing exactly where Elena had hidden emergency cash beneath a loose stone in the fireplace hearth. The money was still there, nearly $200 in bills, dated 1977 and 1978. Alpha's military training had equipped him to analyze threats, assess situations logically, maintain composure under pressure. None of that preparation addressed the possibility that a cabin could remember its former occupants, or that a dog might somehow bridge decades. He turned to Elena's journal for answers. working methodically through the middle volumes that documented her second and third years in hiding. July 14th, 1980 found Papa's fishing rod while organizing the workshop. Michael was ecstatic, begged me to teach him to fish. Had to admit I only watched Papa fish, but never learned myself. We spent the afternoon at the stream experimenting. No fish caught, but Michael's laughter echoed through the trees for the first time in months. With more than any trout, Wolf accompanied us as always. His protective instincts grow stronger each day. Sometimes I wonder if he understands exactly who we're hiding from. No sign of Robert for 8 months now. Perhaps he's finally given up the search, or found someone new to control. I don't dare hope, but I allow myself to breathe a little deeper these days. Alpha set down the journal, lifting the fishing rod to examine its balance. The weight felt familiar somehow, though he'd never been much of a fisherman. The sensation reminded him of picking up Elena's carving knife, his hands seeming to remember motions they'd never performed. He returned to the journal, finding an entry from the following autumn. October 3rd, 1980. Winter comes early to these mountains. Already the night temperatures drop below freezing, and the garden has yielded its final harvest. Michael helps more each year. At 7, he takes genuine pride in our self-sufficiency. His reading improves daily with the books I brought, and those Mrs. Tanner from the general store discreetly provides when I make my quarterly supply trips. The isolation weighs heavily sometimes. Michael needs other children, normal experiences. School, friends, community, all the things Robert's threats have stolen from him. From us both, Wolf has been acting strangely, alert to something beyond my perception. Several times this week I found him standing rigid at the forest's edge, staring into the trees, hackles raised. Yet when I investigate, I find nothing. I tell myself it's merely animal awareness of the changing season, predators moving through as winter approaches. But a deeper instinct whispers caution. Another entry 2 weeks later, October 19th, 1980. Someone was here while we were gathering pine nuts on the western slope. Nothing taken or disturbed, but Wolf's behavior upon our return was unmistakable. Frantic inspection of the cabin perimeter, growling at scents I couldn't detect. We slept in the hidden space beneath the kitchen tonight, Michael thankfully interpreting it as an adventure rather than the precaution it was. I sat awake until dawn, Papa's old service revolver across my lap, wondering if all this vigilance is justified or merely the paranoia of isolation. Is it Robert, a random hunter, or has my mind finally begun to fray at the edges after 2 years of constant watchfulness? Whatever the truth, will remain on high alert. The root cellar is stocked for winter, the firewood split and stacked. We can minimize trips outside if necessary. Alpha closed the journal, running his fingers along the fishing rod's smooth bamboo. Elena's growing unease matched his own in recent days. That persistent sense of presence, of being observed by something just beyond ordinary perception. Blue had taken to patrolling the cabin perimeter each evening before settling, his behavior echoing Elena's descriptions of Wolf. The parallel was becoming too precise to dismiss as coincidence. "What are you sensing, boy?" Alpha asked, watching the healer's alert posture at the window. "What am I missing?" Outside, early October mirrored the timing of Elena's journal entries. The same season, the same quality of light, the same feeling of transition as the mountain prepared for winter's embrace. Alpha had planned to remain through the snow months, testing himself against the isolation as he had so often tested himself against other extremes. Now he wondered if that decision had been entirely his own, or if something had drawn him here specifically, some resonance across decades that even his rational mind couldn't explain away. He set the fishing rod carefully back in its place of honor against the wall. Tomorrow, perhaps, he would try Elena's fishing spot. Not because he particularly wanted fish, but because something about following her path felt increasingly essential, as though understanding her journey might somehow illuminate his own. The brass bell above the door announced Alpha's entrance with a soft, melodic chime. Thornton's general store appeared frozen in time. Wooden floors worn to a honeyed patina, glass jars of penny candy lining the counter, a pot-bellied stove commanding the center of the space. The air smelled of coffee, leather, and the particular dust of dry goods stored too long. 3 weeks at the cabin had depleted his supplies faster than anticipated. The 20-mile drive to Pinecrest, the nearest town, had been a reluctant necessity. "Be right with you," called a voice from the back room, weathered as the mountains themselves. Alpha nodded, though no one could see him. Military habit keeping him near the entrance, back to the wall, eyes cataloguing exits and potential threats. Blue waited in the truck. No pets allowed according to a faded sign by the door. The list in Alpha's pocket was precise. Coffee, flour, salt, kerosene, ammunition for the .30-06 he'd brought for hunting. Simple provisions for a simple existence. He hadn't anticipated the newspaper rack, local weekly edition displaying today's date alongside headlines about school board elections and the Fall Harvest Festival. The connection to the outside world felt jarring after weeks of isolation. "Haven't seen you before." The voice belonged to a man emerging from behind a beaded curtain, wiping gnarled hands on a canvas apron. Stooped with age, but moving with surprising fluidity. White hair cropped close to his skull, eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. "You the fellow who bought the Marquez place?" Alpha stiffened slightly at the name. "Didn't know it had a name." "Everything's got a name up here." The man extended a hand. "Walter Thornton. Family's run this store since 1932. Alpha Apache." The handshake was brief but firm. "Just need a few supplies." Walter's eyes narrowed slightly at the clipped response. "Apache, huh? Military?" "Former. Figured. Got that look about you." "My youngest did 2 tours in Desert Storm." Walter gestured toward a faded photograph behind the counter, a young man in desert camouflage beside a Humvee. "You want coffee?" "Just brewed a pot." Alpha hesitated, social reflexes dulled by weeks of solitude. "Sure, thanks." The coffee came in a chipped mug, advertising a feed store that had probably closed decades ago. Walter poured a cup for himself and leaned against the counter. "That cabin's been empty near 40 years, he said, watching Alpha over the rim of his mug. "Bank's been trying to unload it since the foreclosure. Most folks know better than to buy sight unseen in these mountains." Alpha sipped the coffee, strong enough to dissolve a spoon. "It suits my purposes." "I bet it does." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Isolated, defensible, good water source. Man like you appreciates such things, I expect." The accurate assessment triggered Alpha's instincts. "You seem to know the property well. Used to deliver supplies out there. Back when Elena was—" Walter stopped himself, something cautious crossing his weathered features. "Back before it went vacant." Alpha set down his coffee, suddenly alert. "Elena Marquez?" The question hung in the air between them. Walter's expression shifted subtly from casual interest to wary assessment. "You've found her things." Then, not a question, some. Alpha maintained neutral territory, decades of classified operations, having taught him the value of information exchanged rather than freely given. "Journals, photographs?" Walter nodded slowly. "Figured as much. That cabin holds secrets, always has." He moved to the window, glancing at Blue, waiting patiently in the truck. "Interesting choice of dog you got there." The non sequitur caught Alpha off guard. "Blue's been with me through 3 deployments. Military working dog, retired same time I did. Healer, right? With that one ear that doesn't quite stand up." Walter turned back, something knowing in his expression. "Funny coincidence." Alpha's pulse quickened. "Why's that?" "Elena had one just like it. Called him Wolf, though he wasn't." Walter refilled both coffee cups without asking. "Some folks around here thought that dog was still guarding the place long after." "Well, long after she was gone. When exactly did she leave?" Alpha asked, careful to keep his tone conversational. Walter's weathered face grew guarded. "Nobody knows for certain." She kept to herself. Came to town maybe once every few months for supplies. Then one winter she just stopped coming. By spring, folks figured she'd moved on. Bank took the property when taxes went unpaid 3 years running. "But you knew her." "I supplied her. That's all." Walter's tone indicated a clear boundary. This was her list every time. Never varied. From beneath the counter, Walter produced a yellowed receipt preserved in a plastic sleeve. Alpha recognized several items from Elena's journal descriptions, specific brands of coffee and flour, kerosene, canning supplies. His own list in his pocket contained many of the same items, written without knowledge of hers. She had a boy with her, Walter added, watching Alpha's reaction closely. Never brought him to town, but she bought things a woman alone wouldn't need. Boys' clothes, picture books, toy soldiers once at Christmas. Michael, Alpha said before he could stop himself. Something shifted in Walter's expression. Surprise, then recognition. She tell you that? In her writings. Yes, Walter nodded slowly. Then maybe you should hear the rest. But not here. He glanced meaningfully around the empty store. Some stories aren't meant for public spaces. Alpha understood the implication. Rural communities had long memories and longer ears. I should finish my shopping first, he said, recognizing the delicate moment for what it was. A test of patience, of trustworthiness. Take your time. Walter moved to help another customer who'd entered. I close at 6. My cabin's just behind the store. Blue's welcome there. Alpha watched the old man greet the newcomer with practiced joviality, all signs of their intense conversation vanishing behind a shopkeeper's smile. The receipt remained on the counter between them, a tangible connection between Alpha's present and Elena's past. A breadcrumb on a trail he hadn't realized he was following until this moment. The child's spelling primer lay open on Alpha's lap, its pages yellowed but preserved by decades of darkness. McGuffey's eclectic reader proclaimed the faded cover, copyright 1879, though this edition appeared to be a 1950s reprint. Inside the front cover, careful handwriting noted, "For Michael, words are freedom." Love, Mama? Alpha sat cross-legged on the dirt floor of the hidden room, flashlight propped against a support beam. Blue lay watchfully at the entrance, his eyes reflecting the beam's light like twin amber moons. Walter Thornton's revelations still echoed in Alpha's mind 3 days after their conversation at the general store. The old man had shared what the community knew, rumors of a woman fleeing an abusive husband, whispers of a child kept hidden from sight, the strange disappearance that left the cabin abandoned. Some thought she just moved on, Walter had said, pouring whiskey into chipped mugs at his kitchen table. Others figured something darker. Man like her husband, powerful, connected, he could make problems disappear. Impermanent-like, but Walter had known something the others didn't, a confidence shared during Elena's final supply visit before her disappearance. She knew he was closing in, said she'd prepared for it, had a place they could hide if needed. I assumed she meant another town, another state. Now I wonder. That conversation had sent Alpha back to the cabin with new purpose, inspecting every inch with the methodical precision of a search and rescue operator. Blue had been his unexpected guide, leading him to the kitchen, where the dog's insistent pawing at the base of the pantry had revealed a seam invisible to human eyes. The hidden room measured approximately 8 feet square, accessed through a clever sliding panel disguised as part of the kitchen cabinetry. Recessed beneath the cabin's main floor, with ventilation cleverly disguised within the chimney structure, it would be undetectable to anyone searching the property. Inside, Alpha had found evidence of preparation for extended occupation, shelving stocked with decades-old preserves and canned goods, jugs for water storage, a chemical toilet facility, bedding, and most revealing, educational materials for a young child. The spelling primer was one such item, a teaching tool for hours that would need to be filled in silent confinement. Alpha leafed through it carefully, noting pencil marks beside difficult words, small drawings in margins, evidence of a child's engagement with learning despite extraordinary circumstances. She thought of everything. Alpha murmured to Blue, who whined softly in response. Elena's journals had made no direct mention of this space, a deliberate omission. Alpha now understood, in case her writings were ever discovered. Some secrets were too vital to commit even to private pages. The room told its own story, a desperate mother creating a sanctuary of last resort, a place where she and her son might survive if the world above became too dangerous. The thought process was familiar to Alpha. contingency planning, fallback positions, secure extraction routes. His military training and Elena's maternal instinct had arrived at identical solutions. Other items filled the shelves. A stack of comic books dated 1980-1981. A set of metal toy soldiers standing in formation. Colored pencils and drawing pads, a transistor radio with spare batteries. Each object spoke of Elena's determination to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Michael, even in extremity. But it was the wall that most captured Alpha's attention. Illuminated by his flashlight, the rough wood surface displayed dozens of drawings, artwork created during what must have been hours of confined waiting. Childish illustrations of sunlight and trees, animals and adventures, all the experiences impossible within this underground space. And beneath these drawings, another layer, precise markings in an adult hand. Dates, times, observations, OCT 31, 1981, vehicle on Access Road, departed after 40 min of 4, 1981. Footprints by West Creek. Man's boot size 11 Nov 8, 1981. Wolf alerted to movement north perimeter. Nothing visible deck 12, 1981. Gunshot East Ridge. Likely Hunter deck 24, 1981. Safe to emerge. Christmas Eve above ground. The final entry, dated January 18, 1982. Simply read, "He's found us." Alpha traced the words with his fingertip, revealing the indentation where Elena's pen had pressed hard into the wood in that moment of realization. No further entries followed. Walter's words returned. By spring, folks figured she'd moved on. But the evidence surrounding Alpha told a different story, one where moving on had likely not been possible. The room contained no obvious signs of violence or struggle, yet something about the abrupt cessation of Elena's meticulous documentation suggested a conclusion far from peaceful. The carefully organized supplies, the educational materials, the preserved drawings, all indicated a woman who planned thoroughly for survival. Such a person would not simply abandon this sanctuary without reason. Blue whined again, more urgently, pressing his nose against Alpha's hand. "What is it, boy?" Alpha asked, though the sensation growing in his chest suggested he already understood. The air in the hidden room had changed somehow, grown heavier, charged with a presence that prickled the hairs at the nape of his neck. The flashlight flickered once, stabilized, then flickered again. "Elena?" Alpha spoke the name without conscious intent, the word emerging on an exhaled breath. The light steadied, but the sense of presence intensified, a wordless confirmation that raised goosebumps along Alpha's arms, despite decades of training against superstition. He gathered the spelling primer and carefully rose, respecting both the confined space and the intangible weight of what it contained, not just artifacts of a past tragedy, but something that lingered beyond physical evidence. "I'll find out what happened," he promised the empty air. The words emerging with the weight of a mission acceptance. "To both of you." The manila folder weighed little in Alpha's hands, yet its contents pressed on him with the gravity of long-buried secrets. "Missing persons, Marquez Ian Child, 1982, was written across the tab in faded black marker. Inside lay the sparse official record of Elena and Michael's disappearance, a thin collection of forms, statements, and photographs that had yellowed with time. "These haven't been requested in over 30 years, said Marion Lawson, Pinecrest's town clerk and unofficial archivist. The elderly woman peered at Alpha through thick bifocals, her curiosity evident, but tempered by small-town discretion. "Walter called to say you might be stopping by. The Pinecrest Municipal." Building housed both the sheriff's substation and town offices in a modest brick structure that had likely looked the same for half a century. Alpha had arrived at opening hour, Blue waiting patiently in the truck outside. "I appreciate your help," Alpha replied, his voice deliberately neutral. Years of intelligence work had taught him the value of revealing nothing while learning everything. Marion's weathered hands smoothed her cardigan. "Walter mentioned you bought Eleanor's old place." "I did. Brave man," she murmured almost to herself. Then more directly, there's a table in the corner where you can review those. They can't leave the building, but I can make copies of anything particular." Alpha nodded his thanks and settled at the wooden table, carefully opening the folder. The first document was a standard missing persons report dated February 12, 1982, nearly a month after Elena's final mark on the hidden room wall. The reporting party was listed as Walter Thornton, who had noted concern after Elena missed her regular supply visit and failed to respond to a welfare check. The responding deputy's notes were brief. Residence appears abandoned. No signs of struggle. Some personal belongings and food supplies missing, suggesting planned departure. Vehicle gone. No forwarding address left with neighbors or associates. Subject previously indicated concerns about former husband locating her. Possible she relocated again for same reason. Follow-up notations were equally sparse. Checks of hospitals and morgues in surrounding counties. Inquiries to state police about abandoned vehicles or accident reports, all negative. The investigation had been perfunctory at best. Closed after 6 months with a final assessment. Voluntary departure. No evidence of foul play. Alpha's jaw tightened. The assessment contradicted everything he'd learned about Elena's character and plans. A woman who created hidden rooms, who meticulously documented potential threats, who carefully preserved her child's education even in hiding. Such a woman would not simply abandon a secure location without leaving some indication of her intentions. Deeper in the folder, he found a single black-and-white photograph, the only official image of Elena on record. It appeared to be copied from her Colorado driver's license, showing a solemn young woman with dark eyes that held both intelligence and wariness. The official description listed her as 28 years old, 5'4", 120 pounds, with no distinguishing marks or scars. No photograph of Michael existed in the file. A separate form documented the single attempt to contact Robert Marquez, Elena's ex-husband. The Denver phone number listed had been disconnected, and a note indicated he had relocated to Washington, D.C. for a position with the Justice Department. No further follow-up was recorded. Alpha carefully examined the remaining documents, finding little of substance. A property notice regarding unpaid taxes, a statement from the bank foreclosing on the cabin, routine administrative closure forms. The final page was a handwritten note from Walter Thornton, dated 1 year after Elena's disappearance. Request to be notified if any information becomes available regarding Elena or Michael Marquez. They were good people. They deserved to be remembered. Alpha closed the folder, his military mind assembling the available intelligence into a coherent assessment. Local authorities had conducted minimal investigation, finding no obvious evidence of foul play and little reason to pursue a case involving a woman who had deliberately maintained a low profile. Robert Marquez, positioned within the Justice Department, would have had both the resources to locate his ex-wife and the connections to ensure any investigation remained superficial. "Find what you were looking for?" Marion asked, appearing beside his table with surprising quietness for her age. "Not exactly," Alpha admitted. "There's not much here." Marion glanced toward the front door, then lowered her voice. "There wouldn't be in the official record." Sheriff Baker back then was accommodating to certain influences. Alpha's attention sharpened. What kind of influences?" "The kind that come with federal credentials and generous contributions to local re-election campaigns." Marion's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was just a deputy clerk then, but I remember when the man came asking questions about Elena, flash suit, government manor. Sheriff sent him right to her place, no questions asked." "When was this?" Alpha kept his tone measured despite the surge of adrenaline. "January 1982, during that big snowstorm. I remember because he was driving a car not meant for mountain roads in winter. Nearly went off Miller's Curve on his way out of town." She adjusted her glasses. 2 weeks later, Walter was filing that missing persons report. The timeline aligned perfectly with Elena's final wall marking. "He's found us." "Was there ever any search of the property? The woods surrounding it?" Marion shook her head. Not officially. Some locals who knew Elena checked around after the thaw, but by then... 3 months would have been too late, Alpha finished, thinking of predators and elements. Yes. Marion's gaze held a mixture of old regret and cautious assessment. You're not just some random buyer, are you? You're looking for something specific out there. Alpha considered his response carefully. In small communities, trust was currency, difficult to earn, easy to squander. I'm looking for the truth, he finally said. Elena and Michael deserved better than this. He tapped the thin folder. Marion studied him, then nodded once. The Town Historical Society meets in the basement of the library every Thursday. Edith Tanner was the librarian back then. She kept her own records of things, the official ones left out. She might talk to you. The clerk glanced at her watch. They'll be gathering about now, actually. Alpha rose, recognizing the gift of information being offered. Thank you, Mr. Apache, Marion called as he reached the door. When he turned, she added simply, some ghosts don't rest until they're acknowledged. Be careful what you stir up out there. The prescription bottle stood on Alpha's kitchen table, amber plastic dulled with age. The label had long since deteriorated, but the white cap remained tightly sealed, preserving what rattled inside. Alpha had discovered it hidden in a small cavity beneath the bathroom floorboards, directed there by information gleaned from Edith Tanner at the Historical Society. Elena had seizures, Edith had explained, her arthritis gnarled hands wrapped around a teacup. Nothing debilitating with medication, but without it. The elderly librarian had left the implication hanging. She always worried about maintaining her supply. In those days, you couldn't just call in refills. The bottle likely contained Elena's emergency reserve. Pills hidden separately from her regular medication in case of urgent need. Alpha made no move to open it, respecting this final privacy while acknowledging its significance. Elena's medical condition added another layer of vulnerability to her situation. Another reason her disappearance into the wilderness seemed increasingly unlikely as a voluntary choice. Edith had shared other details omitted from official records. How Elena occasionally borrowed books on wilderness survival and natural medicine. How she once asked about caves or natural shelters in the surrounding mountains. How in her final visit to the library, she had seemed both resolute and afraid, checking out books on first aid and winter foraging that were never returned. Now, as snowflakes began drifting past the cabin windows, the first storm of the season arriving exactly as predicted, Alpha returned to Elena's final journal. He had saved it for last, both dreading and needing to witness her ending through her own words. The entries from late 1981 showed increasing. Vigilance, November 4th, 1981. Found unfamiliar bootprints by the West Creek today. Too large to be mine, too fresh to be Old Man Jenkins who hunts these parts. Wolf was agitated all morning, which is what prompted me to check the perimeter. Michael remains unaware of my concerns. I've framed our increased indoor time as winter preparation rather than precaution. The hidden room is fully stocked now. We could survive there for at least 2 weeks without emerging if necessary. I've practiced the entry sequence with Michael as a game, timing how quickly we can disappear from the main cabin into the space beneath. His current record is 47 seconds from alarm to completely settled below, with no trace left above. Some would call this paranoia. They haven't seen Robert's eyes when rage overtakes him. A later entry showed her psychological strain. December 12th, 1981 gunshot on the eastern ridge today. Likely a hunter, but we retreated to the hidden room for 3 hours until I was certain. Michael handled it well, though these drills are affecting him. He woke crying last night, something he hasn't done since our first months here. I question my choices daily now. Is this hypervigilance destroying his childhood as surely as Robert would have? Am I the selfless protector in this story, or am I keeping Michael from a normal life because of my own fears? The isolation that once felt like safety increasingly feels like another form of prison. My medication is running low. 3 weeks until I can risk another town visit for refills. the final entries became increasingly terse, the handwriting tighter, more controlled. January 10th, 1982, Wolf refused to come inside tonight. Standing sentry at the forest edge, hackles raised, completely ignoring my calls. I brought Michael to the hidden room as precaution and watched through the night. Nothing visible, but Wolf's behavior is unprecedented. Check the emergency supplies again. Everything ready. January 15th, 1982. Someone has been here. Nothing obvious. No broken locks or disturbed belongings, but small things out of place. The chair angled differently. Michael's toy soldier not where he left it. Wolf nearly frantic, pacing and whining. Too dangerous to run now with the storm moving in. The hidden room is our best chance. We sleep below tonight. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps it's just winter isolation feeding paranoia. But I don't think so. The final entry, dated January 18th, 1982, was brief. He's here. Car coming up the road. No mistaking the engine sound, his Cadillac. Wolf is barking like I've never heard. Michael is already below with supplies. I'll join him once I've gathered the last essentials. If you're reading this, know that I tried. Everything I did was to protect my son from a man who sees control as love and ownership as right. I'm not sorry for running. I'm only sorry if I've failed. Please find the enclosed letter and ensure it reaches the proper authorities. It contains everything: evidence of Robert's abuse, documentation of his threats, records of the restraining orders that did nothing, testimony from witnesses too afraid to speak publicly. Michael, if somehow you read this one day without me, you were loved, completely, fiercely. Never doubt that for a moment. No further entries followed. No enclosed letter was found among Elena's possessions. Alpha closed the journal gently, his military mind reconstructing the likely sequence of events. Robert arriving during the January snowstorm. Elena and Michael retreating to the hidden room. What followed remained unclear, but the absence of bodies or obvious violence in the cabin suggested the confrontation had moved elsewhere. The prescription bottle sat accusingly on the table, a final piece of evidence that Elena would never have willingly abandoned. Without her medication, seizures would eventually incapacitate her, making survival in the wilderness impossible. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, erasing the present as it had perhaps erased the past. Alpha glanced at Blue, who sat alertly by the window, watching the whiteness with unusual intensity. "We need to find where they went," Alpha told the dog quietly, "before the snow makes it impossible." Blue's ears twitched in what seemed like agreement, his amber eyes reflecting something beyond canine understanding. The topographic map lay spread across Alpha's kitchen table, its creases worn from repeated folding and unfolding. Detailed USGS markings showed the terrain surrounding the cabin, elevation lines, water features, and notable landmarks within a 10-mile radius. Alpha had found it tucked behind a loose board in Elena's workshop, overlaid with her own notations in faded blue ink. 3 days had passed since the first snowfall, the world outside transformed into a crystalline landscape that creaked with cold beneath a brittle blue sky. Alpha had spent those days methodically preparing for 2 simultaneous missions: winter survival and the increasingly urgent search for Elena and Michael's fate. She marked all these locations deliberately, he told Blue, who watched from his customary position near the wood stove. Alpha's finger traced Elena's annotations, small X's marking caves, natural shelters, and water sources throughout the surrounding wilderness. Places of refuge or hiding, carefully documented by someone who understood the value of escape routes and safe harbors. One location stood out, a circle rather than an X, positioned approximately 3 miles east along the ridgeline that formed the property's natural boundary. Beside it, Elena had written simply, "Last resort." Outside, afternoon shadows stretched long across unmarked snow. The temperature would drop precipitously after sunset, and the weather report from Alpha's battery-powered radio warned of another storm system approaching within 48 hours. The window for exploration was closing rapidly. His military training had included winter survival, high-altitude operations, and tracking in adverse conditions. If anyone could safely navigate the wilderness at the cusp of winter, it was Alpha. Yet something beyond rational caution made him hesitate, a sense that following Eleanor's final path would irrevocably change his connection to her story. Blue rose suddenly, moving to the window with unusual alertness, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Alpha joined him, scanning the forest edge with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years detecting anomalies in Afghan mountain ranges and Iraqi deserts. Nothing moved in the visible landscape, yet Blue's posture remained rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" Alpha murmured, one hand resting on the healer's head. The dog whined softly, pressing against Alpha's leg with unmistakable urgency. Over the past weeks, Alpha had come to trust Blue's awareness of things beyond ordinary perception. The dog's behavior had guided him to Elena's hidden caches and warned him of subtle changes in the cabin's atmosphere that preceded his most vivid dreams of her presence. "Time to go?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Preparations had been made in advance, pack filled with survival essentials, GPS unit programmed with coordinates translated from Elena's map, rifle cleaned and ready. Alpha dressed with the efficiency of long practice, layering clothing against the cold, checking and rechecking equipment as he shouldered his pack. A familiar sensation washed over him, the focused calm that had always preceded combat operations, a state of heightened awareness coupled with emotional detachment. His teammates had called it his machine mode, this ability to function with cold precision when situations deteriorated. "All right, Sergeant," he told Blue, falling into the old pattern of addressing his former service dog. "Search and rescue operation. Let's move." The air outside stung his lungs with crystalline purity. Fresh snow crunched beneath his boots as Alpha locked the cabin and adjusted his pack one final time. Blue circled once, then set off toward the eastern ridge without waiting for command. His purpose seemingly as clear as Alpha's own. They moved through the forest in practiced tandem, Alpha setting a sustainable pace that balanced progress against energy conservation. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they ascended, the ridge rising nearly 2,000 feet above the cabin's elevation. Though the distance was modest, the combination of snow cover and increasing grade demanded careful navigation. Blue ranged ahead, then back, his behavior reminiscent of their deployment pattern when searching for IEDs or hidden combatants. The dog's training remained intact despite his age, nose working the air currents, ears swiveling to capture sounds beyond human perception, body language signaling all clear or potential concern. Halfway to their destination, they crossed a frozen stream that appeared on Elena's map. Nearby stood a massive ponderosa pine, its trunk wider than Alpha's arm span. Something about the tree captured his attention, an irregularity in the bark, approximately 5 feet from the ground. Upon closer inspection, the anomaly revealed itself as carved initials, E+M 1981, surrounded by a rough heart. The carving had weathered with the tree, bark growing around its edges, preserving the simple declaration through decades of seasons. Alpha traced the letters with gloved fingers, imagining Elena and Michael marking their presence here, a normal, human moment amid their extraordinary circumstances. A small act of defiance, perhaps, against the temporary nature of their situation. People had carved initials in trees for centuries, a primal urge to declare, "We were here, we existed, we mattered." "They came this way," Alpha said aloud, certainty settling into his bones. This was no random coincidence, but a breadcrumb on the trail he sought to follow. Blue waited nearby, uncharacteristically patient despite the cold. When Alpha finally turned from the tree, the dog immediately resumed their eastward journey, now moving with greater purpose. The sun hung low on the horizon, its weak winter light casting long shadows across unmarked snow. They had perhaps an hour of daylight remaining, enough to reach the circled location on Elena's map, but little time for thorough exploration before darkness would force a decision between making camp or returning to the cabin. Alpha pressed on, guided by Blue's unwavering confidence and the increasingly certain feeling that he was retracing steps taken 4 decades earlier. A woman and child fleeing through winter woods, pursued by a threat more immediate than the deadly cold. The small silver whistle gleamed dully in Alpha's palm, its metal surface scratched from years of handling. A child's whistle, the kind parents give for emergencies, with a simple design and piercing tone that could carry through forest or crowd. Alpha had found it half buried in soil at the base of a lightning-struck pine, Blue's insistent digging revealing its presence. "Good boy," he murmured, examining the object carefully. 2 letters were crudely etched into one side, Mr. Michael's initials. The discovery had come just as daylight began failing. The winter sun surrendering to an early dusk that brought plummeting temperatures. They'd reached the area marked on Elena's map, a series of rocky outcroppings that overlooked a steep ravine. The terrain offered natural shelter in multiple small caves and overhangs, defensible positions with clear sightlines to approaching threats. Alpha had been searching methodically, employing grid patterns from his search and rescue training, when Blue's behavior shifted from investigation to focused excitement. The dog's discovery of the whistle confirmed they were on the right track. Elena and Michael had indeed come this way in their final flight. Now, as darkness claimed the forest, the weather deteriorated with alarming speed. What had begun as scattered snowflakes thickened into driving sheets of white, wind whipping through the trees with a banshee's howl. The storm that weather reports had predicted for tomorrow had accelerated, arriving with the sudden violence common to mountain systems. Change of plans. "Sergeant," Alpha told Blue, securing the whistle in his breast pocket. "We're not making it back tonight." Years of survival training guided his next actions. The largest cave opening provided adequate shelter, approximately 10 feet deep, with a natural stone overhang that blocked wind and snow. Previous occupants had arranged stones in a rudimentary fire ring near the entrance. "Recent occupants," Alpha noted, examining the arrangement more carefully. The positioning was tactically sound, allowing heat while minimizing smoke visibility from below. Within 20 minutes, Alpha had established a survival camp, small fire burning with carefully selected dry wood, emergency blanket creating a heat reflector against the rear wall, pack contents organized for accessibility. Blue settled near the fire, shaking occasional snowflakes from his coat, eyes reflecting golden flames. The storm intensified as full darkness descended, transforming the forest into an alien landscape of howling wind and driving snow. Temperature dropped precipitously, but the small cave remained relatively warm, thanks to the fire and natural insulation of stone. Alpha added another branch to the flames, then withdrew Elena's journal from his waterproof pack. He'd brought the final volume as reference, hoping it might provide additional clues. In the flickering firelight, her handwriting seemed more immediate, less a historical document than a message sent across time. "Were you here, Elena?" he asked the empty air. "Is this where you brought Michael that night?" The question lingered, unanswered yet somehow acknowledged. Over recent weeks, Alpha had grown accustomed to the subtle shifts in atmosphere that suggested Elena's presence, a change in air pressure, a momentary drop in temperature, the sensation of being watched with benevolent attention. Blue lifted his head suddenly, ears pivoting toward the cave entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Alpha was instantly alert, hand moving to the rifle beside him. The storm created perfect cover for approach. Wind masking footsteps, swirling snow, reducing visibility to near zero. Perfect conditions for ambush, a tactical assessment he'd made countless times in combat zones. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, straining to hear anything beyond the storm's fury. Blue rose to a crouch, hackles raised, attention fixed on something beyond the fire's illumination. Alpha clicked off his tactical flashlight, allowing his vision to adjust to the darkness beyond the flames. Years of night operations had honed his ability to discern shapes in minimal light. Nothing appeared in the swirling snow, yet Blue's alertness remained undiminished. Then just at the periphery of the firelight, movement, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shadow shifting against shadows. "Who's there?" Alpha called, voice carrying the authority of command. No response came, yet the sense of presence intensified rather than diminished. Blue's growl subsided into a curious whine, his posture relaxing from threat assessment to puzzled recognition. The temperature within the cave plummeted suddenly, Alpha's breath clouding in the frigid air despite the nearby fire. The flames themselves seemed to dim momentarily, then flare with renewed strength. In that flare of light, Alpha caught a glimpse of something that defied rational explanation, a translucent figure at the cave's entrance. A woman, dark-haired and solemn-eyed, her outline blurring at the edges like smoke. Beside her, smaller and less distinct, the suggestion of a child. Alpha had seen many things during his military career. Mirages in desert heat, hallucinations from sleep deprivation, the strange perceptual distortions that extreme stress could produce. None prepared him for this moment of absolute certainty that he was seeing Elena and Michael, not as they had been in life, but as some echo preserved by tragedy and unresolved purpose. The apparition lasted only seconds before dissolving into the swirling snow. Blue whined again, moving toward the entrance, then stopping as if uncertain. Alpha remained motionless, combat instincts warring with the evidence of his senses. The rational part of his mind catalogued possible explanations: exhaustion, altitude, firelight playing on snowfall. Yet deeper instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive through 4 combat tours, recognized truth when encountered, however impossible it might seem. The whistle in his pocket seemed suddenly heavier, its presence a tangible connection to the figures he'd glimpsed. Alpha withdrew it, turning the small silver object in his fingers, feeling the rough scratched initials catch against his skin. "I'm still looking," he said quietly to the storm beyond the cave. "I haven't given up." The wind seemed to pause momentarily in its howling, creating a pocket of silence that felt like acknowledgement. Then the storm resumed with renewed fury, settling in for what promised to be a long, challenging night. Alpha added more wood to the fire, preparing for hours of vigilance. Whatever had happened to Elena and Michael 40 years ago, their story remained unfinished, and somehow, improbably, Alpha had become part of its conclusion. The gold wedding band was tarnished almost black, its once bright surface dulled by decades exposed to the elements. It lay in Alpha's palm, unexpectedly heavy for such a small object. Engraved inside the band were 2 dates separated by an ampersand: 6/12/74 and always. Dawn had broken clear and cold after the storm. The world transformed into a crystalline landscape that sparkled blindingly as sunlight struck fresh snow. Alpha had emerged from the cave to find Blue already alert and pacing near a snowdrift. Approximately 50 yards downslope, the dog's behavior had the focused intensity that Alpha had learned to trust, not just alert but purposeful. When Alpha approached, Blue began digging determinedly at a specific spot where wind had sculpted snow against a fallen log. The ring had emerged from beneath layers of accumulated soil and forest debris, not buried deliberately but lost, perhaps in desperate circumstances. Alpha recognized it immediately from photos in Elena's journal. Her wedding ring removed when she fled Denver but kept as potential emergency currency. "She was here," he murmured, though the evidence had already been mounting. The whistle, the tactical positioning of the cave, and now this tangible proof of Elena's presence. Blue's discovery triggered renewed determination. Alpha secured the ring carefully in a zippered pocket, then surveyed their surroundings with fresh purpose. The storm had delayed, but not defeated their mission. "Search pattern," he instructed Blue, the familiar command activating the healer's training. "Find them, They worked in widening circles from the cave entrance, Alpha using his hunting rifle as a probe through deeper snowdrifts, Blue ranging ahead with nose working the cold air. The dog's ability to detect scents even after decades remained remarkable, a capacity that had located IEDs buried for months during their deployments. Midday approached when Blue's behavior shifted dramatically. The dog stopped at the edge of a steep ravine, barking with unusual urgency. Alpha approached carefully, mindful of potential snow cornices that could collapse under weight. The ravine dropped approximately 60 feet to a rocky stream bed below, currently frozen into fantastic ice formations. Near its edge, partially exposed by Blue's digging, lay a man's leather dress shoe, expensive, city-styled, entirely out of place in this wilderness. Alpha examined it without touching, his mind reconstructing possible scenarios. The shoe's positioning and condition suggested it had been lost during a struggle rather than discarded. Scuff marks and a broken lace spoke of violent removal. "Good boy," he told Blue, who continued to work the area with focused intensity. The ravine's edge revealed more evidence as Alpha carefully cleared snow, scuffed soil preserved beneath the snow layer, broken branches on nearby shrubs, a depression that could have been created by a body falling heavily. Testing his theory, Alpha tossed a snowball over the edge, tracking its trajectory to the rocks below. The physics aligned with his hypothesis. A person falling or being pushed from this spot would likely land in the stream bed. Blue's renewed barking drew his attention. The dog had moved about 10 yards along the ravine edge, where wind had scoured snow from a rocky outcropping. There, caught in a crevice, lay a second item, a man's wallet. Its leather hardened by exposure but largely preserved. Alpha extracted it carefully, opening the stiff folds to find driver's license and credit cards still in their slots. The Colorado license displayed a stern-faced man in his 30s, Robert James Marquez, with a Denver address and a 1981 expiration date. "So you found them," Alpha said aloud, pieces falling into place with grim certainty. The evidence suggested a confrontation at the ravine's edge, Robert tracking Elena to this final refuge. A struggle ensuing, and Robert ultimately falling to the rocks below. Whether accident or deliberate act remained unclear, but the outcome seemed certain. Elena had defended herself and Michael with fatal consequences, but where had they gone afterward? Alpha studied the terrain with tactical assessment, considering options available to a woman and child in winter wilderness after such an encounter. They wouldn't have returned to the cabin, too obvious if authorities investigated Robert's disappearance. They couldn't have traveled far in winter conditions, especially with limited supplies. They'd need immediate shelter, Alpha reasoned aloud. Somewhere close, but hidden. Blue had continued working independently, following some scent trail invisible to human perception. The dog moved with purpose, heading away from the ravine toward a densely wooded slope approximately 200 yards distant. Alpha followed, trusting the healer's instincts. The slope presented challenging terrain, fallen logs and rock outcroppings hidden beneath snow, requiring careful navigation. Near its crest, the landscape changed subtly, a natural stone formation creating a partial overhang, easily overlooked unless specifically sought. Blue disappeared beneath this outcropping, his excited whining echoing from within. Alpha approached cautiously, drawing his flashlight to illuminate what proved to be a narrow opening to a natural cavity. Within the hillside, not quite a cave, but a protected space beyond casual discovery. The beam revealed what decades of mountain weather had preserved. Remnants of emergency shelter, tattered blankets, the aluminum framework of a small camping stove, plastic containers that had once held supplies, and against the rear wall, partially concealed by fallen debris, 2 sets of remains, one adult, one child, positioned in eternal embrace. Alpha exhaled slowly, a breath he felt he'd been holding since first discovering Elena's hidden journal. Here was the truth. finally revealed. Elena and Michael had survived their confrontation with Robert only to succumb to the unforgiving winter. Sheltering together in this final refuge, the gold ring weighed heavily in his pocket, a promise of always that had proven tragically accurate. They had remained together, exactly as Elena had determined they would. Blue settled beside the remains, not with the excitement of discovery, but with the solemn recognition of journey's end. His posture suggested something beyond animal awareness, a completion, a circle closed. Alpha stood in silence, bearing witness to the story that had drawn him inexplicably into its conclusion. After decades lost in mountain solitude, Elena and Michael had finally been found. The revelation brought no triumph, only quiet certainty and the weight of responsibility. What should be done with this truth, these remains? What final respect could be offered to lives so desperately defended and ultimately lost? Alpha knew with sudden clarity exactly what Elena would have wanted. The two simple wooden crosses stood against the backdrop of pine and snow, their surfaces weathered to a natural silver gray that blended with the winter landscape. Alpha had crafted them from cabin timber, each cut and join executed with precision, honed through decades of military attention to detail. No names marked these memorials, only dates carved with a steady hand. 1954-1982 on the taller cross, 1975-1982 on the smaller. Spring would bring wildflowers to this sheltered clearing near the cabin. Alpha had selected the location carefully, visible from Elena's favorite window seat, protected from harsh winds by a natural formation of stone, yet open to morning sunlight that would warm the earth earliest after winter's retreat. 3 months had passed since his discovery in the mountain cave. 3 months of careful decisions, respectful actions, and gradually shifting purpose. The sheriff's office had accepted his report with minimal questions, the discovery of decades-old remains generating bureaucratic process but little investigative energy. The case of Elena and Michael Marquez had been officially closed, ruled as exposure deaths during severe winter conditions. Alpha had volunteered no information about Robert's remains in the ravine. Some truths served no justice by revelation. A man who had hunted his ex-wife and child to their deaths deserved the anonymity of scattered bones in a mountain streambed, not the dignity of recovery and marked grave. "What do you think, Blue?" Alpha asked, surveying their handiwork. Would she approve? The healer sat attentively beside him, grey muzzle and clouded eyes showing his advancing age more prominently after their winter ordeal. Yet something about the dog's posture suggested renewed purpose rather than decline, as though completing this mission had restored rather than depleted his essential spirit. They had buried Elena and Michael beneath the crosses after the spring thaw softened the earth enough for proper graves. The official report listed the remains as relocated to family plot, a bureaucratic fiction Alpha had crafted to prevent institutional intervention. In truth, he had become their family through circumstances neither science nor logic could adequately explain. The manila envelope in his coat pocket contained the final paperwork, deed transfer complete. Property taxes paid in full, legal ownership of the cabin and surrounding acres now officially his. Not that he had doubted his right to remain after all that had transpired. But Alpha's military precision extended to administrative matters as readily as tactical ones. Walter Thornton had been his only confidant in the process, the old storekeeper providing quiet assistance, navigating county requirements and local customs. Their conversations over coffee had gradually expanded beyond practical matters to include memories of Elena, Walter's perspective adding dimensionality to the woman Alpha had come to know through journals and supernatural connection. "She'd have liked you," Walter had concluded after one such conversation. Same kind of steel in the spine, same way of seeing clearly what needs doing and getting on with it. The cabin itself had transformed under Alpha's care, wounds of neglect healing through methodical repair. The hidden room remained untouched, a memorial space rather than functional area. Elena's belongings had been carefully preserved, her journals secured in waterproof containers for protection against mountain seasons. Most evenings now found Alpha at the kitchen table, continuing where Elena's writing had ended. His own journal chronicled both practical work and philosophical reflection, addressed occasionally to Elena herself, as though continuing a conversation across decades. April 15th, 2025 replaced the east-facing windows today, as you'd planned to do that final spring. Found your measurements still penciled on the workshop wall, exact to the quarter-inch. You had a craftsman's eye. Michael would be 50 this year. I wonder what man he might have become given the chance. Something in your journal entry suggests he had your determination, your clarity of purpose. The dreams have changed since we laid you to rest properly. Less urgent now, more peaceful. Sometimes I catch glimpses of you both in that strange space between waking and sleep, not as you were in those final moments, but as you might have been had life granted different circumstances. Michael growing tall, your hair silvering like mine. Blue seems to see you more clearly than I can. Sometimes he wags his tail at empty corners of rooms, or cocks his head listening to voices beyond my perception. The phenomenon Walter had described to Alpha had proven accurate. For decades, locals had reported glimpses of a blue healer patrolling the property long after Elena's disappearance. Now, with Elena and Michael properly laid to rest, those sightings had ceased. Whatever connection had bound Blue to this place, to Wolf before him, appeared resolved through Alpha's intervention. Spring's approach brought increasing visitors to the general store, and with them curiosity about the cabin's new occupant. Alpha navigated these interactions with the careful reserve of his military years, revealing little while establishing boundaries that most mountain residents instinctively respected. Only to Walter did he confide his decision to remain permanently, to retire fully, into the life he had inherited from Elena, rather than return to the world that had never quite reclaimed him after his service ended. The cabin needs someone who understands it, he had explained simply. And perhaps I needed it too. Now, standing before the crosses as late afternoon shadows stretched across new snow, Alpha felt a completion that had eluded him through decades of military precision and emotional discipline. Not happiness in any conventional sense, but rightness, the satisfaction of a mission fulfilled beyond original parameters, a purpose discovered rather than assigned. Let's head back, he told Blue, turning toward the cabin where chimney smoke rose straight in the windless air. It'll be dark soon. As they walked the familiar path, Alpha glanced back once at the crosses standing sentinel against approaching evening. For a moment, brief enough to dismiss as trick of light or willing imagination, he thought he glimpsed two figures standing hand in hand beside the memorials. Watching his departure with peaceful attention, Alpha raised a hand in silent acknowledgement, then continued homeward, Blue padding faithfully at his side.